The room went silent. I stood in the foyer of my grandfather's Victorian estate, the very house I'd spent the last 5 years maintaining, while my Uncle Silas traveled the world on business trips funded by Grandpa's dwindling savings. Silas was standing by the mahogany desk, a gold pen in hand, flanked by 2 men in expensive, ill-fitting suits. They looked like the kind of developers who saw history as nothing more than a site for luxury condos. "Mark, what are you doing here?" Silas asked, his voice dripping with forced condescension. "I told you I had a private meeting. Go check the gutters or something. Stay useful." I didn't move. I felt the weight of the cell phone in my pocket. 10 minutes ago, I was at the hardware store when a private number flashed on my screen. It was Sarah Vance, a senior loan officer at First National. She wasn't just a banker. She was a woman I had helped 3 years ago when I found an error in her own property survey. She owed me one, but more importantly, she knew the law. "Mr. Thorne," she whispered over the phone, "your uncle is at the branch right now, or rather his lawyers are. They are attempting to fast-track a lien release and a deed transfer for the estate. But Mark, I flagged the file. There's a secondary name on the internal title registry that wasn't on the public summary. It's yours." Now, looking at Silas, I realized the depth of his treachery. He wasn't just selling the house. He was trying to erase me from the legacy. He thought I was just the quiet nephew who fixed the leaks and mowed the lawn. He thought I was a fly on the wall. "The meeting isn't private anymore, Silas," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through my veins. "In fact, I think the gentlemen in the suits would be very interested to know that the document you're about to sign is legally radioactive." One of the developers frowned, looking from Silas to me. "Who is this, Silas? You said the title was clear." Silas laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "He's just my late brother's kid, a handyman. He's confused. Mark, get out before I call the police for trespassing." I took a step forward and placed a manila envelope on the desk. "Call him. I'd love to have a state trooper witness the moment you commit mortgage fraud." Silas reached for the envelope, his face turning a shade of purple that matched his silk tie. But before he could touch it, my phone rang again. I put it on speaker. "Mark?" Sarah's voice echoed through the silent room. "The bank just issued a formal freeze on the Thorne estate assets. We've detected an unauthorized signature attempt." The gold pen slipped from Silas's hand, clattering onto the hardwood floor. Silas lunged for the phone, but I stepped back, revealing a second person standing in the doorway, a man Silas hadn't seen in 20 years. The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken resentment. To understand why Silas felt so comfortable trying to sell the roof over my head, you have to understand how he viewed me. To Silas, I was the help with a shared last name. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, Grandpa took me in. Silas, who was already deep into his first bankruptcy, saw me as a rival for Grandpa's affection and his money. At every family dinner, Silas would make it a point to remind me of my place. "It's a shame about your father, Mark," he'd say, swirling a glass of expensive scotch Grandpa had paid for. "He was a dreamer, no business sense. I suppose you'll follow in his footsteps. Don't worry, though. As long as you keep the garden tidy, I'll make sure you have a room in the attic when I take over." He called me nobody to my face. He called me the charity case behind my back. When Grandpa's health began to fail, Silas moved in like a vulture. He didn't come to help with the medication or the late-night hospital runs. He came to scout the furniture. I spent my nights studying property law and land surveying, working a quiet job at the county records office. Silas mocked it. Filing papers for minimum wage? How fitting for a boy with no ambition. I let him believe it. I let him believe I was just a quiet, broken man who lived in the shadow of the Thorne name. I kept the house running, fixed the plumbing Silas broke, and listened through the vents. I heard him whispering to his shady associates about liquidating the old man's junk. Grandpa wasn't as senile as Silas hoped. One night, 3 months before he passed, Grandpa called me into his study. He handed me a small, rusted key and a flash drive. "Mark?" Grandpa whispered, his grip surprisingly strong. "Silas thinks a house is just bricks and dirt. He doesn't understand that a home is a contract with the future. Keep your eyes open. Be the man your father was, the one who looks at the foundation, not just the paint." After the funeral, Silas didn't even wait for the grass to grow over the grave. He showed up with a group of contractors the next morning, telling me I had 30 days to pack my little life into boxes. He laughed when I asked to see the will. "The will says I'm the executor, Mark, and as executor, I've decided you're an expense we can no longer afford." But Silas made one fatal mistake. He assumed that because I was quiet, I wasn't documenting every single word he said. As Silas stared at the man in the doorway, Grandpa's old attorney, Mr. Sterling, he realized the charity case had been doing a lot more than just filing papers.
"Sterling?" Silas gasped, his bravado crumbling for a split second. "You retired years ago. You have no standing here." Mr. Sterling stepped into the room, looking every bit the lion of the courtroom he once was. "I came out of retirement for a specific reason, Silas. It seems there's been a misunderstanding regarding the Thorne estate listing on the private commercial market." My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. 2 days ago, while working my boring job at the county records office, a notification popped up on my terminal. A private developer had filed a preliminary intent to demolish for the Thorne property. The applicant wasn't Silas. It was a shell company called Apex Holdings. I had spent all night digging through the shell company's filings. Silas had taken a massive, predatory loan against the house by forging my consent as a secondary resident. He was planning to sell the land to Apex, pay off his secret debts, and vanish before I even realized the house was being torn down. "You tried to sell the land out from under me, Silas," I said, stepping toward him. "You signed a contract with Apex Holdings yesterday at 4 p.m. You told them the house was vacant." Silas regained his footing, his eyes narrowing into slits. "So what? I'm the eldest. I'm the executor. I can do whatever I want with this dump. It's worth $10 million as a lot, and nothing as a drafty old museum for your daddy's failures." The two developers looked at each other nervously. "Silas, you said the nephew was handled. You said he had signed the waiver." "He did," Silas barked, pointing a finger at me. "I have the signed waiver in my safe. Mark signed it weeks ago in exchange for a payout. He's just trying to extort more money now that he sees the big players are in the room." I felt a chill go down my spine. A signed waiver? I had never signed anything. Silas had moved from greed to straight-up felony forgery. He was cornered, and like any cornered animal, he was biting. "I never signed a waiver, Silas," I said calmly. "I have the paper, Mark. Your signature, witnessed and notarized," Silas screamed. He looked at the developers. "Don't listen to him. He's a disgruntled employee. We're moving forward with the sale today." But then the lead developer's phone chirped. He looked at the screen, and his face went pale. "Silas, we have a problem. The bank just pulled the escrow. They're saying the title is under a cloud of fraud." Silas turned to me, his face contorted with rage. "You think you're smart? I'm the executor. I'm kicking you out right now. Officers!" he yelled toward the front door. 2 police officers, who had been waiting at the curb at Silas's request, stepped inside. "Remove this trespasser from my property." The officers looked uncomfortable. One of them, Officer Miller, had known my grandfather. "Mr. Thorne," Miller said, looking at Silas, "you said there was a squatter." "That's him," Silas pointed at me. "He's been told to leave multiple times. I have the eviction notice right here." He whipped out a piece of paper, one he had likely printed that morning. "He has no legal right to be in this house. He's interfering with a multi-million-dollar business transaction." I looked at the officers. "I live here. My ID is registered to this address. I have been the primary caretaker of this property for 5 years. Doesn't matter, Silas sneered. The owner says go, and since I'm the executor of the estate, I am the owner in the eyes of the law until the probate is finished. Get him out, or I'll call your captain. Officer Miller sighed and looked at me. Mark, if he's the executor and he wants you out, you have to vacate. You can fight it in court later, but right now, you've got to go. This was the moment Silas had planned for. He wanted me on the street, away from the documents, away from the house, so he could finalize the Apex deal before a judge could even look at the file. He knew that once the house was demolished, the evidence of his fraud would be buried under tons of concrete. Fine, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'll go. Silas grinned, a predatory, victorious look. Take your trash with you, Mark. Anything left in 30 minutes goes in the dumpster. I walked upstairs, Silas following me like a prison guard, mocking me the whole way. You really thought you could win? You're a clerk, Mark. I'm a businessman. You play with paper. I play with lives. I packed a single bag. I didn't grab clothes. I grabbed my laptop, the rusted key Grandpa gave me, and a small leather-bound ledger I had kept hidden behind a loose floorboard in the attic. As the officers escorted me to the front gate, Silas stood on the porch, lighting a cigar. The developers were still inside, talking rapidly on their phones. "Don't bother coming back, Mark," Silas shouted. "The locks are being changed as we speak. You're officially a nobody again." I stood on the sidewalk, my bag over my shoulder, as the heavy iron gates clicked shut. I looked homeless. I looked defeated. Silas's friends drove by and laughed. But as I walked toward the bus stop, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Sarah at the bank and Mr. Sterling. He fell for it. He's in the house now. Initiate the ink forensics on the waiver. I wasn't going to the bus stop. I was going to the one place Silas never thought to check, the basement of the local library, where the original 18th century land deeds were kept in a temperature-controlled vault.
People often underestimate the power of a boring job. For 3 years, I had been the lead title auditor for the county. I didn't just file papers. I traced bloodlines. I studied the chemical composition of old ink. I knew how to read the hidden language of property law, the clauses that haven't been used since the 1800s but are still legally binding. Silas thought the house was his because he was the eldest son. He didn't realize that in our state there's an old statute called the caretaker's reversion. If a property is maintained solely by a non-owner for a period of 5 years while the primary heir is absent, and if the primary heir has committed financial waste, the title undergoes a mandatory judicial review. I sat in the library, spreading out the original deeds. My hands were steady. I wasn't just a handyman. I was a specialist. I opened the flash drive Grandpa gave me. It didn't contain a will. It contained video files, hours of them. Grandpa sitting in his chair, talking to the camera. Silas will try to sell the bones of this family to feed his ego. Grandpa's voice crackled through my earbuds. But he doesn't know about the foundation. Mark, the house isn't the prize. The prize is the mineral rights and the historical easement. I've placed the house in a blind trust that only triggers if an unauthorized sale is attempted. You are the trustee, Mark, not the heir, the trustee. You have the power to void his very existence as executor. I felt a surge of cold clarity. Silas hadn't just forged my signature on a waiver. He had forged Grandpa's signature on the executor appointment papers 3 years ago while Grandpa was heavily medicated. I pulled out my laptop and opened the ledger I'd taken from the attic. It was Grandpa's daily log. In it, on the day Silas claimed the will was signed, Grandpa had recorded that he was in a different city for a specialist appointment. Silas had forged the entire will. I called Mr. Sterling. I have the proof. The will Silas used to get himself appointed executor is a total fabrication. I have the medical records and the daily log to prove Grandpa wasn't even in the house that day. "That's big, Mark," Sterling said, "but we need more. We need to prove he's already taken the money. If he's moved funds from the estate to his personal offshore accounts, we can trigger an immediate arrest warrant for embezzlement. Check the Apex Holdings deposit.
Silas thinks he's using a shell company, but I tracked the IP address of the registration. It was done from the guest Wi-Fi in the Thorne house. He is Apex Holdings. He's selling the house to himself to wash the money. Sterling went silent on the other end. Mark, if you can prove he's both the buyer and the seller, he's not just looking at a lawsuit, he's looking at 20 years. But we need the physical ledger. Where is it? I have it, but I need to get back into the house. There's a safe in the basement that only opens with the key I have. The real will is inside. I met Sterling at a small diner near the courthouse. He looked at the ledger, his eyes widening as he turned the pages. This is incredible, Mark, but there's something else you need to see. While you were at the library, I did some digging into Silas's birth certificate and your grandfather's early records. He slid a yellow document across the table. It was an adoption decree from 1968. Silas isn't a Thorne by blood, Sterling whispered. Your grandfather adopted him when he married his first wife, but there was a clause in the original Thorne family trust, the one established by your great-grandfather. It's an ancestral lineage clause. It states that the Thorne estate can only be inherited or managed by a direct biological descendant. I froze, which means Silas was never legally eligible to be the executor, let alone the heir, Sterling finished. Even if the will he produced was real, which it isn't, it would be void under the trust law. You are the only living biological Thorne. The house, the land, the mineral rights, they've been yours since the moment your grandfather died. Silas has been playing king on a throne that doesn't exist. The magnitude of the lie was staggering. Silas had spent his whole life acting superior, treating me like a charity case, when he was the one who had been brought in by grace, and he had repaid that grace by trying to destroy the family's legacy. We have to move fast, Sterling said. Silas is meeting with the city council tonight to get the demolition permit fast-tracked. He's bribing someone, Mark. If that permit is signed, the house is gone by dawn. Not if I get to that safe first, I said. The safe contains the deed of biological succession. It's the one document that Silas can't forge because it's held in a secondary trust with the state. I headed back to the house under the cover of darkness. I knew the security system. I was the one who installed it. I slipped through the servants' entrance in the back, the one Silas always forgot to lock because he thought it was beneath him to use it. I made it to the basement, the air thick with the smell of old wood and secrets. I found the hidden panel behind the wine cellar. I inserted the rusted key. Click! The heavy steel door swung open. Inside wasn't just a document, it was a box of letters. Letters from my father to Grandpa talking about Silas's gambling debts and his attempts to steal from the family business years ago. But as I reached for the deed, the lights in the basement flickered and died. A heavy thud echoed from the stairs. I knew you'd come back for the shiny paper, Mark, but you forgot one thing. I don't need to be a real Thorne to kill one.
The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, blinding me. Silas stood at the base of the stairs, holding a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. He wasn't the polished businessman anymore. His hair was disheveled and his eyes were manic. "You think a piece of paper stops me?" Silas spat. "I've already told the police you broke in. I told them you were armed and unstable. By the time they get here, I'll have defended my property against a burglar." I stayed calm, my hand gripping the leather-bound ledger. "The police already know the truth, Silas. Sterling is at the station right now with the adoption records and the bank fraud evidence." Silas laughed, a chilling sound. "Sterling, that old drunk, his word against mine. And as for the bank, I've already moved the funds. By tomorrow morning, I'll be on a plane to a country that doesn't care about ancestral lineage clauses." He stepped closer, the iron poker scraping against the stone floor. "Give me the bag, Mark. Give me the ledger and the deed, and maybe I'll let you walk out of here before the accident happens." I looked at him, really looked at him. "You really hate me that much because I remind you that you don't belong?" "I hate you because you're weak," Silas screamed. "You have all this power, all this history, and you spend it fixing toilets. You don't deserve this name." Suddenly, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Silas froze. "See, they're here for the burglar." He lunged at me, swinging the iron poker. I dodged, the heavy metal whistling past my ear. I wasn't a fighter, but I knew this basement better than he did. I ducked behind a support beam and threw a heavy box of old records at his feet. He tripped, sprawling onto the floor. I ran for the stairs, but Silas was fast. He grabbed my ankle, pulling me down. The ledger slid across the floor, out of reach. "You're not leaving," he roared. At that moment, the basement door burst open. "Police! Drop the weapon!" Silas didn't drop it. He scrambled up and pointed the poker at the officers. "He's the one! He broke in! He tried to kill me!" Officer Miller stepped into the light, but he didn't look at me. He looked at the safe, then at Silas. "Mr. Thorne, we received a call about an unauthorized entry, but it wasn't about Mark. It was about you." "What?" Silas gasped. "The bank flagged your personal account for a $5 million wire transfer from a frozen estate, and Mr. Sterling just handed us a sworn affidavit regarding a forged will. We're going to need you to come with us." Silas's face went white. "Wait, no, this is my house. I have the papers." "Actually," I said, standing up and brushing the dust off my jeans, "you don't, because the papers you signed this morning, the ones with the developers, look at the fine print on your copy, Silas." The scene shifted to the following morning. The police hadn't arrested Silas yet. They needed the smoking gun from the final boardroom meeting with the developers to prove the intent to defraud. It was a sting operation, and I was the bait. We were in the high-rise office of the developers. Silas was there, flanked by his lawyers, looking smug. He thought he had talked his way out of the misunderstanding with the police. He thought he just needed to sign the final closing documents to win. "Let's get this over with," Silas said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "The Nephew is handled. The title is clear. I want the wire transfer completed in 10 minutes. The lead developer looked at me. I was sitting at the end of the table, quiet as always. "Mark, you're listed here as a consultant for the Thorne estate. Do you have any objections to this sale?" Silas chuckled. "He doesn't have a say. He's just here to witness his own irrelevance." I looked up. "Actually, I do have one objection. Silas, could you read Section 4, Paragraph C of the contract you just initialed?" Silas frowned and looked at the paper. His eyes scanned the legalese. Slowly, his face drained of all color. "This signatory hereby acknowledges that any funds received from this transaction shall be immediately redirected to the Thorne Biological Trust in the event that the signatory's lineage is found to be non-biological per the 1892 Charter." "What is this?" Silas hissed. "This wasn't in the draft." "I'm the one who drafted the final version," I said, leaning back. "While you were busy picking out your new car, I was working with the developer's legal team. See, Silas, they don't want to buy a house that's involved in a fraud case. When I showed them the adoption records and the caretaker's reversion clause, they realized you were a liability. They agreed to help me in exchange for a fair price on the land's historical preservation credits." "You betrayed me!" Silas screamed, slamming his hands on the table. "No," I said. "I audited you. There's a difference." I pulled out my laptop and projected a video onto the boardroom screen. It was the CCTV footage from the basement the night before. It showed Silas swinging the iron poker, screaming that he didn't care about the law, and admitting he had moved the funds. "This is inadmissible," Silas's lawyer shouted. "Actually," Mr. Sterling said, walking into the room with 2 federal agents, "it's perfectly admissible when it's used to support a RICO investigation into Apex Holdings, the shell company Silas used to try and buy his own property." Silas looked at the federal agents, then at me. He realized he wasn't just losing the house, he was losing his freedom. But then he smiled, a jagged, ugly smile. "You think you won, Mark? I already burned the real will. The one in the safe, that was a decoy. Without the original will, the house goes to the state in a contested probate. If I can't have it, no one can."
The boardroom went quiet. Silas's boast hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. If the real will was gone, the ancestral lineage clause would trigger a decades-long legal battle that would freeze the property until the taxes ate it alive. The house would rot. Silas would be in jail, but he'd have his revenge from a cell.
"You really think I'm that stupid, Silas?" I asked. "I watched it burn, Mark." Silas laughed. "3 months ago, while the old man was sleeping, I took the original from his desk and tossed it in the fireplace. I replaced it with the forgery I made. You've been fighting for a ghost." I looked at Mr. Sterling. He nodded and pulled out a small, sealed glass tube. Inside was a piece of parchment. "Silas," I said, "Grandpa knew you'd try to burn it. He knew you'd been stealing from the wine cellar and the petty cash for years, so he did something a dreamer like my father would do." I opened the ledger I'd been carrying. I turned to the very last page. It looked blank, but I took a small UV light from my pocket and shined it on the paper. Glowing in bright blue were the words, "The will is the house." "What does that mean?" the developer asked. "Grandpa was an architect," I explained. "He didn't just write his will on paper, he wrote it into the structure of the home. Silas, do you remember when Grandpa had the library floor refinished 10 years ago? You complained about the noise." Silas's eyes widened. "The original you burned was a copy Grandpa left out specifically for you to find. He wanted to see if you'd actually do it, and when you did, he knew he couldn't trust you with the paper. The real will, the one that leaves everything to me and acknowledges your adoption and your disinheritance, is etched into the subflooring of the library, witnessed by the 3 men who laid the wood. It's a permanent part of the foundation." Silas collapsed into his chair. He had spent years trying to destroy the house, not realizing the house itself was the evidence of his crimes. "And there's one more thing," I said, looking at the federal agents. "Check the chimney in the library. Silas didn't realize that Grandpa used fire-resistant ink for the decoy will. The charred remains in the fireplace, they can be reconstructed. They'll show Silas's fingerprints and the chemical signature of the accelerant he used." As the agents moved in to handcuff Silas, he lunged across the table, not at me, but at the laptop. He smashed it onto the floor, screaming, "There goes your video! There goes your proof! You have nothing now!" I didn't flinch as the laptop shattered. I didn't even look down at the broken plastic. "Silas," I said softly, "I've been the lead title auditor for the county for 3 years. Do you really think I keep my primary evidence on a local drive?" I pointed to the ceiling corner. The entire meeting was being live-streamed to a secure cloud server managed by the district attorney's office. You didn't just destroy a laptop. You just committed destruction of evidence in front of federal witnesses. The fight went out of Silas. He went limp as the agents pulled his arms behind his back. The arrogance, the Scotch-fueled bravado, the years of treating me like a servant, it all evaporated, leaving behind a small, broken man who had tried to steal a life he hadn't earned. As they led him out of the boardroom, Silas stopped in front of me. "Why?" he hissed. "Why didn't you just tell me? Why play this long game?" "Because," I said, "if I had told you, you would have just found a new way to lie. I had to let you walk all the way to the edge so everyone could see you jump. You didn't lose because of me, Silas. You lost because you forgot that the quietest person in the room is usually the one taking the most notes." The house was saved. The developers, seeing the PR nightmare of trying to bulldoze a historical landmark owned by a local hero, backed out of the Apex deal and instead offered to fund a full restoration of the Thorne estate as a museum. A month later, I stood on the porch of the Victorian house. The iron gates were open, the garden was flourishing, but it wasn't me mowing the lawn anymore. I had hired a crew of local students, paying them a fair wage to learn the trade of historical preservation. I looked at the gold pen Silas had dropped that first day, the one I'd kept as a reminder. I walked to the edge of the property and tossed it into the tall grass. Karma doesn't always come with a shout. Sometimes it's a phone call from a bank, sometimes it's a hidden clause in a century-old deed, and sometimes it's just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the foundation you built was stronger than the lies they told. They called me nobody, they called me replaceable, but as the sun set over the Thorne estate, I knew the truth. Never underestimate the quiet man, because while you're busy talking about the future, he's already written the contract.